Green.
Hot.
Humid.
Massive.
Dense.
Noisy.
Spidery.
Itchy.
Sweaty.
Damp. Vegetable-y?
Well, yeah, I mean, it is the smell that always stays with me.
When you think of a forest, especially a rainforest, I bet you don't think of the smell.
But it's there, all damp, and it is that vegetably richness, a kind of resinous maybe, and at the back, a kind of spicy tang.
And that smell comes from the fertile soil, the wonderful sticky stuff from which the lungs of the earth grow. Rainforests.
Almost a third of land-based photosynthesis happens in tropical forests. That's the process that creates oxygen.
And not only do the forests help produce oxygen, but they're also great at sucking up excess carbon from the atmosphere, something that we know we've got to do more of to tackle the climate crisis head on.
But these lungs have been smoking in recent years, and they're getting smaller too.
So how do we know how much rainforest we have left?
And how can we protect what's still there and help our forests to breathe deep again? From the Natural History Museum, this is Our Broken Planet, where we find out how we created some of the problems in our modern world and search for solutions from nature and science. I'm Tori Herridge.
And I'm Khalil Thurlaway. Across this series, we'll be exploring the interconnected problems facing our Earth. We'll be examining some of the issues that we humans have created and asking the question, what can we do about it?
And in this episode, we're investigating the air conditioners of the world, rainforests. Everybody loves a rainforest.
Yeah, I mean, have you been
Surely?
to one?
Yes. It was my first trip on my own outside of the UK.
Nice. Where did you go?
Went to French Guiana. It was a bit of like a baptism of fire in terms of foreign travel. But it was amazing. It was amazing.
I was born in Brazil myself, and although I didn't grow up there, I've been back a few times to visit family, friends and stuff. And one of those times we went to the Amazon, and nothing can really prepare you for that kind of overwhelming experience. It's a sensory overload.
It is, isn't it?
It's noisy, it's smelly in a gorgeous way.
It's like, it's really, like, it's one of those, it's totally sensory overload, and it's the smell, it is what really struck me.
It's the smell of life happening.
Yes, or rot's happening.
Both.
Maybe, yeah, it's like it's all there.
It's the smell of, to paraphrase The Lion King, the circle of life. Things dying and that producing things living.
It's like properly intense. It's that kind of visceral experience, of a rainforest that really is like a motivating force, I think, for those who want to save it. Piassava fibre palm.
Leopoldinia piassaba.
Quinine.
Cinchona legeriana.
Rubber tree.
Hevea brasiliensis.
Zebrawood tree.
Astronium fraxinifolium.
Cocoa tree.
Theobroma cacao.
Dynamite tree.
Hura crepitans.
The shupa tree.
Quararibea cordata.
These are just some of the trees you might see as you step through the Amazonian rainforest. And, of course, the list goes on.
They store a lot of carbon. They are a habitat for many species, so biodiversity is a huge aspect. For the water cycle and for the climate, they are so important.
This is Professor Rico Fischer of the Helmholtz Center for Environmental Research in Leipzig, Germany.
If you go into the tropics, so like in the Amazon, and if you have there a forest area which is the size of a soccer field, there you have 400 tree species. And in the tropics, you have totally 50,000 tree species.
Like any complex system in the world or in our body, it's good to get a checkup every now and again. Rico and his colleagues are trying to scan the Amazon rainforest, but the sheer number of tree species makes their task incredibly difficult.
Especially in tropical forests, we have many layers of trees within the forest. So we have these very large canopy trees, but we have also sub-canopy trees, etc.
Rico uses a special LiDAR laser on the International Space Station, called JEDI, of course, which sends down a beam of light onto the rainforest.
By measuring how long the light takes to bounce back, scientists can work out the density of a forest, meaning that they can track the growth and loss of forests over time, as well as estimating how much carbon all these trees store.
But they didn't stop there. Rico and his team used this data to try and count the entire Amazon.
So we implemented 100 million of these LiDAR laser shots into the forest model and then simulated every tree in the Amazon rainforest, so more than 400 billion trees, and got a really nice carbon map of the Amazon. So now we know how much carbon is stored in every region in the Amazon, and we estimated also the full carbon balance of the Amazon rainforest. So the numbers which were around before our study are between 40 gigatons carbon and 90 gigatons carbon, so huge numbers, and we found out that it's in the middle, so it's around about 60 gigatons carbon which is stored in the Amazon rainforest.
40 gigatons, that's 40 billion tons of carbon. It sounds like a lot, right? But actually, it's not as much as we might have hoped.
And we found out that the Amazon rainforest is still a carbon sink, but much smaller than expected before.
So what's making the Amazon less of a carbon sink? A less effective pair of lungs, if you will? Deforestation.
Yeah, because over 15 billion trees are cut down every year.
If you just turn it into football pitches, that would be the equivalent of one football pitch gone every couple of seconds.
Wow. Like, even for me, I'm not the biggest football fan, but, you know, I can envisage that size every 2 seconds.
Yeah, I mean, there's no way I could even run across a football pitch in 2 seconds. I wouldn't be able to outpace it.
Like, in the course of this conversation, that's an immense number of trees.
Yeah. Breathe in, breathe out, another one's gone. And in fact, how does that translate into day-to-day?
Yeah, because, you know, we need to breathe, we need oxygen. These are, you know, not the only source of oxygen. There's other plants on land and there's photosynthesis happening in the seas, but having trees around is a real benefit. They give you shade, they clean the air, not just of carbon dioxide, but of particulate matter in some cases.
Yeah. And yeah, that's a really, I think, important point to make, right? The air quality aspect of things. Because, of course, rainforests, when they're cleared, aren't just chopped down. They also burn. And with that burning comes a whole host of other problems for our planet.
So on a day when there's haze, I would wake up, and if I go outside, I would actually see either a yellowy tinge or a grey tinge to the air.
This is Dr. Helena Varkey. She's an associate professor of environmental politics at the Universiti Malaya in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia.
And if I tried to look a bit further, I wouldn't be able to see as far as I usually do. And everything would be a bit grey or a bit discoloured, a bit darker as well. And often I would also be able to smell smoke or something burning. And, you know, on a day like this, I would know that at least for a few days, this would be my life.
Southeast Asia is home to 15% of the world's tropical rainforest. It is lush, verdant, full of life, with 380 new species being discovered in the region in the last 2 years alone. But like many precious habitats, these forests have been facing severe challenges in the past few years, from logging to farming to fire.
So the Southeast Asian haze is actually smoke that comes from fire, mainly in Indonesia and parts of Malaysia. However, the issue becomes transboundary when the smoke is heavy and thick enough that it can travel across great distances. So depending on certain factors, it can affect up to 6 Southeast Asian countries at one time, which is why it's called the Southeast Asian haze or ASEAN haze.
Now, we've heard about this tricky transboundary issue before in our fire episode. If you haven't heard it, check it out. There we learned that the smoke from forest fires can travel for hundreds of miles and pays no attention to human borders.
You might remember those yellowish, hazy scenes from New York in June 2023. Well, that's what Helena grew up with and began to experience more and more frequently.
Every dry season brings the risk of haze, with the highest chances of a haze event falling between July and October. And aside from the grimness of waking up to a yellow sky, there are serious health issues as well.
So the haze is actually made up of really small biomass particles. So this is something that you can breathe in. They are so tiny that they can't be filtered out by your nose and your mucus and all that. So when you breathe them in, it is sort of caught in your lungs and it can even go into your bloodstream. People will have problems of like shortage of breath. People who have asthma, they will be affected. And if it becomes really bad, basically you can really feel like you're breathing smoke. So for example, in Indonesia, in the places really close to the fires, they have what they call oxygen houses, where they literally have a house where you can come in for however many minutes or hours to actually just breathe clean air to sort of alleviate your symptoms.
So kind of post-apocalyptic, but it's like not post anything, is it? It's now.
It's now.
It's now,
Yeah.
right? It's like imagine thinking, oh, now it's time to go to the oxygen house.
Yeah, the idea of oxygen being a special treat is really affecting.
Yeah, and just like that sort of thought. And we don't mean that's like the extreme end, right? You've got to get into oxygen houses, but it's just the fatter end of a wedge that you see all the way closer to home when you see the figures of children who are growing up with terrible asthmatic problems in London because the air quality here is also not great, right? And so, we are just one end of a similar air quality phenomenon.
What is happening is that certain areas, certain types of land in Southeast Asia catches fire. And usually these are peatlands. And peatlands are areas that are usually wet. They are flooded, so they are not naturally fire prone. But when these lands are disturbed, when they are dried and when they are drained mainly for agriculture.
So what's actually catching fire in the rainforest is, in Indonesia anyway, is the peat, right? It's the peat that has been drained for agriculture.
Peat is basically flammable soil made of dead plants. It's mad, the idea of kind of the ground being flammable.
But what does a peat fire look like?
The surface is kind of like another world. It's a mixture of kind of greys and blacks and whites because it's ash.
This is Dr. Thomas Smith, Assistant Professor in Environmental Geography at the London School of Economics.
This layer of ash, and when you walk across it, I guess it's the closest to feeling like you're walking on the moon, because it's like you kind of get your feet sink into it and you make these footprints, and it kicks off a huge amount of fine kind of dust into the air because it's this really fine ashy material. The problem is that once they catch fire, it's very, very difficult to extinguish those fires using conventional firefighting techniques. Really, the only thing that can stop these fires is very heavy rains. And I'm talking about the monsoon rains, not just a kind of heavy downpour. It requires a huge amount of water, and we've done some experiments to have a look at that. So the peat is smouldering. It's not like a huge kind of flaming mass of orange and yellow flames like you'd see with a savanna fire or a grassland fire. And also it's burning underground in places and often has a surface layer that is the ash from what had burnt previously. And ash is hydrophobic. So you pour water on it and the water will just flow off.
The idea of flammable ground is real creepy.
Yeah, it's really creepy. It is really. I mean, ultimately, I think that's the best way of describing it. It is properly creepy. And imagine being somebody who lives in that area, who lived through to see it transform from one thing to the other.
And really overwhelming. The idea that these lush rainforests can become almost moonscapes, like ashy, smoky places that affect lots of different countries.
Yeah, moonscapes are ashtrays. It's horrible, isn't it? It's like it's literally like the lungs of the earth. Like the rainforest, the lungs of the earth, have been just like chain smoking cigarettes, and that's all that ash and particular matter sort of going out into the atmosphere, right? Spewing out of the atmosphere, and people have to breathe it.
Yeah, and these forests are being cleared for agriculture. The famous one is palm oil.
An orangutan in every jar, I believe they say.
That's why it's orange. Palm oil is the product, but oil palm is the crop.
It's very clear.
Palm oil palm.
Yeah, palm oil palm.
It was introduced to Southeast Asia from West Africa around 1970. Yet by 2011, exports had reached 50 million tons annually from Indonesia and Malaysia alone, with those two countries making up almost 86% of global palm oil exports.
That is a vast amount of palm oil, vats and vats and vats. Yeah, I mean, but the thing is, right, so palm oil is really nutrient dense.
And absolutely delicious.
And so in some ways, yes, there is a reason why it is such a popular crop. And it is used in everything, biscuits, instant noodles, even things like shampoo or lipsticks, washing up liquid, sometimes even candles, it's everywhere.
It's also used in a lot of traditional cuisines. So, for example, Brazilian cuisine is heavily influenced by West African cuisine because of the transatlantic slave trade. And so there, óleo de dendê, which is palm oil, is used in all sorts of really kind of fundamentally Brazilian dishes.
Yeah, and people can demonize palm oil very, very easily. But it's important to remember that actually it's kind of a wonder crop in many ways, and it's important culturally to so many different people. So it's not so much palm oil is bad, but bad palm oil is bad.
But we're definitely going to be hearing more about the impacts and uses of palm oil in this episode. But it's not the only product that's increasing the demand for fertile, farmable land from rainforests. Southeast Asia also exports 87% of the world's natural rubber.
Yeah, and then there's paper and pulp as well. And then lastly, but not least, timber harvesting or logging. These three activities are responsible for degrading around 80% of Asia's tropical forests. And ultimately, the only way that those things can change is if you put down rules that force people to behave well, in inverted commas, right? And those systems can change with the right pressures and the right campaigners. It is possible to campaign to change laws in one country, and that can have a knock-on effect.
You can walk all alone in the forest, but you don't feel like alone. I don't know whether it's scary or not, but for me, it's calming to walk and then to experience life in the forest.
Mardi Minangsari is the president of Kaoem Telapak, an environmental justice organization in Indonesia. She's been spending time in Indonesia's forests since the 90s.
That's one thing that we recognize very quickly, that's different from the previous visits to natural parks, to the forest, is that the sound of the chainsaws, cutting the trees.
Minang and her friends heard the growls of the chainsaws ring out in the forest, and they knew they had to do something.
We thought all of this devastation of the forest happening, how can we help, bring this to the attention of the government and then try to change things for the better. And also we knew that it would be very difficult because at that time, we were still under the dictatorship, and we knew that we will face a lot of obstacles because of the complicity of officials in all of this forest destruction.
Minang and her friends formed the campaigning group Kaoem Telapak in the late 1990s. They were trying to protect the forest from the looting and misuse of natural resources that was happening across the country.
Indonesia has had a long struggle for independence. The 20th century was marked by occupation and then by dictatorship.
Yeah, President Suharto was Indonesia's second president, and he took control of the country in 1966, and he ruled as a military dictator for 32 years. His reign was marked by corruption, and he cashed in on the rapid industrial transformation of the country at the cost of its precious natural environment.
But in the late 1990s, Suharto's grip on power began to slip, especially as a financial crisis began to put pressure on the many foreign companies who'd invested in Indonesia. As the economic and political crisis deepened, the students and young people of Indonesia began to protest. In 1998, they took to the streets to demand change, and Suharto was forced to resign.
Since then, Kaoem Telapak's work has informed Indonesia's modern approach to agricultural issues by advocating for more protection and regulation of natural resources like the forest.
So Indonesia is currently the first country in the world that have a timber legality certification system, and also encompasses like a sustainability certification. And this is big deal if we remember that when we started almost 80% of Indonesia's timber production is illegally produced.
Getting a verification system in place is a massive achievement. But unfortunately, recently the political tide has begun to swing away from regulation and protection.
In the past several years, we have had quite a few of the regulation whereby the government is easing regulation to get permits to lure more investments.
As is so often the case, the priorities of big corporations are in conflict with the priorities and indeed the lives of local and indigenous communities. And one of the biggest contributors to this conflict is our old friend palm oil.
When a forest is being converted into palm oil, the impact is almost instant. For example, in the rainy season, there were flash floods. And then sometimes this opening of the forest also mean that the sacred forest for the indigenous peoples also being devastated. Because for indigenous peoples, forest is their identity. So they have what they call the sacred area within the forest. Usually this is the ancestral graveyard. But palm oil companies doesn't give a damn about these sacred sites for indigenous peoples. So can you imagine if you are living your life, the way you know from when you were born, and suddenly it's no longer there. So you are there, but you're not who you are anymore. It just destroys your identity.
It's really hard as someone who grew up in a city to imagine what it's like to have such incredibly beautiful and rich nature as part of your identity in your neighborhood.
I guess it's actually imagine your house burning down and how awful that would feel. And then imagine that like your entire community just being gone.
And there's this really powerful contrast of modern industry and commerce and kind of international capitalism colliding with indigenous communities and people's traditions and lives and their sacred sites and practices. There are two worlds colliding, and one of them has bulldozers and chainsaws.
Yeah, quite, yeah, exactly, and a whole lot of money.
Yeah.
Yeah. It shouldn't be impossible to have a better version of this. People do have to eat. And there's, at some point, something somewhere will have to give. But it doesn't have to be entire swathes of the precious resources of our natural world. It hasn't got to be about trampling over people's lives and livelihoods. And it hasn't got to be like that.
Brazil has, much like Indonesia, a history of colonialism and then a military dictatorship and then democracy. And there have been, wildly oscillating approaches to, for example, the nature of the Amazon and the indigenous peoples of the Amazon, as well as the workers in the agricultural and industrial sectors of Brazil, which are massive.
Yeah. The critical take home for all these things is that it's really, 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 really hard to make change happen from below if the people at the top don't have your interests at heart.
Obviously, the challenges or the risk of doing forest monitoring, especially monitoring the illegalities or all of this, is security. The security risk to the monitors can happen in terms of physical risk. You can get caught by a company or their security guards. You can get beaten. You can get, even in some areas, the worst cases, you can get killed.
Around the world, environmental activists and land protectors are met with violence, and the consequences fall disproportionately on indigenous peoples. In 2021, 40% of all fatal attacks on environmental activists and land protectors targeted indigenous people, despite them only making up 5% of the world's population.
For example, some indigenous peoples, like I said, because it's their identity, they are willing to risk their lives for these fights. But even that, we always share to them how to lessen the risk, because obviously But we don't want to lose another forest defenders or human rights defenders.
It really, really makes me cross. People who are losing their lives, they're defending their homes directly, right? But they're also literally taking the fall for the defence of parts of our planet that are necessary to all of us, that just don't happen to be on our doorsteps. And it's like that disproportionate burden of activism. It really is unfair.
It is. And what Minang was saying about not wanting to lose another forest defender, activists are not just activists.
Yeah.
Activists are human beings with lives and families. So to value and honour these people who are putting their lives and their homes and their families and their safety on the line to protect these forests, we have a duty to pay attention and to spread that and to build that and to use whatever power that we have to amplify that.
Yeah, which we all can do, actually. So in some ways, you can on one hand feel powerless, but on the other hand, you can say, well, actually, that is something when it's not on your doorstep that you can do. Because if enough people raise their voices and say, this is something we value, these are people that we value, these are places that we value, then bit by bit, those voices will be heard.
And when we feel powerless, it's really important to remember that we're not alone in this struggle, whether it's the people around us immediately or people on the other side of the world. There's still plenty of good people organising and working together to do good things for the benefit of everyone.
There are good people doing good things, but what we need is for everyone to find that goodness inside them so they do the right thing in the right direction. And sometimes these things aren't opposed, and sometimes science can show a way where everyone benefits. And actually, amazingly, one of those examples you can see right now happening when it comes to oil palm farming.
People aren't dumb and they're not naive. They realize that there's a biodiversity crisis. They also realize that we need to be having food, and they also realize that people need to have income. And so they want to be part of this conversation.
Dr. Michael Perkovich from the University of Cambridge has worked in rainforests in Indonesia and Liberia in West Africa.
Moving through a rainforest is not something easy. And in addition to, say, getting your clothes caught on thorny plants or random holes in the ground that your boot ends up falling into, but on top of that, then suddenly you'll be covered in ants that are trying to bite you or, any other number of things where it doesn't feel like a fragile environment, which is all the more impressive than at the rate at which humans have been able to disturb rainforests, I think.
Yeah, and then you hit the oil palm plantation.
Exactly. And it's so different, and it's a complete change in terms of what vegetation is present. And what then becomes the question is, how do we then grow oil palm in a way that mitigates some of those ecological impacts of production? And what are ways in which we can do that while still growing food at the same time, so while maintaining those yields? And I've sort of set that up as that these are two opposing sides of a coin, but actually there's no reason why both of those things can't be done at the same time. And so these are what we call these win-win situations.
Michael talks about win-win situations, right? Obviously, that's what everyone wants. And in this particular context, what he was telling me about those oil palm plantations is that you get them, they're often kind of woven through by loads of waterways. So, they're intersected by rivers, right? And then what he's interested in is what happens where the river meets the plantation, and whether or not you can do something there. And one of the things they are looking into are what is called, in technical terms, a riparian buffer. Now, riparian just means beside the river, right? So a buffer between the waterway and the plantation.
These kinds of biodiversity buffers are not just valuable where water and land meet, but also between neighbouring areas of agricultural land. The rich, tangled hedgerows you sometimes get in the countryside. A lot of these have sadly disappeared as farming has got more and more intensive. But, we're increasingly understanding the value of these little pockets of these little havens of biodiversity amongst big areas of monoculture crops.
Yeah, and that's exactly what Michael and his research group have been experimenting with, right? To see whether or not that same situation is true for oil palm plantations.
our research group has been looking at ways to restore riparian areas in oil palm plantations. And we've particularly been looking at that through either relaxing management. So if you stop applying pesticides, you stop applying herbicides, and you just let the natural community grow up. And that's what we call passive restoration. Or by taking what we call an active restoration approach, which for us involves planting trees within that area in order to directly seed that regrowth of structural complexity, with the idea being that it will have these beneficial knock-on impacts on biodiversity and functioning.
This seems really reminiscent of what we've seen in Europe and the UK, which is the removal of things like hedgerows, and we're only now understanding the value that they have and starting to try and bring them back.
Yeah, riparian buffers aren't just a thing for oil palm plantations. They're something that is useful across every single agricultural sector. But I think what's really inspiring about hearing what Michael and his team have been doing is that potential for a win-win. That thought that you might be able to carry big palm oil with you on this journey towards, a more biodiverse, more sustainable world. And if that isn't hopeful, I don't know what is.
Yeah, and what I really like about this story as well is how, just like some of the other stories we've looked at over the series, it's about working with and alongside the nature that we are in, rather than trying to fight it head on and, make a big square flat field with nothing but your crop.
Yeah. Our world is a complex place. The complexity is part of the story. Mm-hmm. You need that complexity. I mean, humans, we love that complexity. We look out on a complex, beautiful natural landscape and we instinctively appreciate it as beauty. And I always think about that. I mean, if you think that there's a certain stark beauty, minimalist beauty maybe, in a monoculture in its own way, that kind of organised rows of star-shaped palm plantations, but it gets very boring very quickly.
Why don't we pretend like that we're a bird and we're flying overhead an oil palm plantation and you're moving across the landscape, and so as you're looking down as a bird, what you're seeing is oil palm after oil palm after oil palm.
So our imaginary bird is seeing all these regular oil palms in the plantation, and then it hits the riparian buffer, where biodiversity has been preserved or reintroduced by planting several varieties of tree. And suddenly, everything changes.
And if you were to enter into that riparian buffer, then you're going to be experiencing quite a different microclimate from the surrounding plantation as well. So it might be cooler, it might be more humid. And then, of course, as well as that, there's this river that's running through it. So the sound is going to change too, because you're suddenly going to be hearing the sound of running water. And so help you if you even get into that water as the bird that we are, because then, of course, you're having an entirely different experience as it is in that right too.
I'm imagining the sound of running water, the coolness of a forest border. I mean, we're recording this in June in the city, and that
I'm not going to swim in the
sounds
Thames.
lovely.
It does sound lovely, doesn't it? It's really nice. Yeah, and so you get that, don't you? That kind of really lovely vision of beautiful, cool river, and this idea that the forests and this biodiverse, complex place are acting like a kind of air conditioner. And actually, Michael's been seeing some really encouraging results.
It was amazing to me that within 2 years of the trees being planted, I mean, you couldn't even fit your hands around the trunks. And today, I mean, some of the trees, and it depends on the species, of course, but they've grown, I mean, many meters tall. So they shoot out of the soil in the tropics, it seems to me. And so there are already differences, and there's clear changes in the structural complexity of the system, which is really exciting. And crucially, what we probably won't ever find is it's not like that if you regrow blocks of rainforest trees in a riparian area, it's not as though you're suddenly going to get back all your rainforest animals. So it's not like an orangutan is going to grow out of the soil. What we hope and what we are trying to make occur is that also gradually is that these buffers could spread out over time so that the trees are going to gradually grow outwards as new seeds fall. And as they expand along with them, it's not only the trees that will be expanding, but also the biodiversity, the non-tree biodiversity within. and the different ecosystem functions that they're performing. So again, this way of growing crops in a way that is both good for productivity and profitability of farmers, but also is better for the ecosystem at large.
I think a lot of this is really exemplifying the kind of nothing about us without us mentality. Having Indigenous voices at the table at, local, national and international levels is so important to really having a fuller understanding and a more kind of equitable approach to how we look after and interact with and live in the natural world.
Yeah, and that one would be like all twee and, everything's going to be lovely, because there's problems, right? There are still problems and we can't be complacent about things. But it does feel like there's things maybe moving in the right direction. I feel like we're having these conversations now. It's become more normal. It should be normal, right? To have everybody at the table. It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous that they're not. It's ridiculous that people living in places aren't part of the discussion.
Indigenous people have been actively marginalised and alienized for decades, centuries. And so we are having to unlearn collectively a lot of messed up attitudes and approaches.
And that's just it, isn't it? It's like, it's the beginning of something. It's the seeds of change have been planted. And so it's just up to all of us to help them grow.
Thanks for listening to Our Broken Planet. We hope you've learned something along the way, and please don't despair. We all have an important role to play in helping to fix the problems in our world. And it starts with having conversations like the one in this episode. As many of us as possible. If you found it meaningful, why not share this episode with the people in your life?
Let us know what you thought about this episode and join in the conversation on social media using the hashtag OurBrokenPlanet. Or check out the bonus content and resources over on nhm.ac.uk/podcast. Next time, we're diving into warmer than expected waters to explore how sea life is getting on in our warming oceans.
Spoiler alert, I, for one, welcome our new jellyfish overlords. I've even got a tattoo to prove it.
Save it for next week, Khalil. Our Broken Planet is presented by Khalil Thirlaway and me, Tori Herridge. The producer was Leonie Thomas, the series producer was James Tyndale, and the executive producer was Will Yates. Our Broken Planet is a Whistledown production for the Natural History Museum.